Welcome to Houston Strange. My name is Adam and I will be your host. Not too long ago now, I had the opportunity to check out a location that had been on my bucket list for years. I had heard terrifying stories and seen countless paranormal investigators in countless TV shows walk through the hallways of this imposing building, and I'd never really considered that I might get a chance to check it out for myself. A little under 3 hours from Houston lies the sleepy little borough of Yorktown. I rolled in under the blistering summer sun after driving through many a small town with that old Texan charm that makes you feel like you've just missed a horse and wagon. Streets that wouldn't look out of place in a Clint Eastwood film. I was very thankful for my car's air conditioning in those moments. As I trundled through town, carefully observing the speed limit so as not to upset any local sheriffs, I couldn't help but feel a nervous pit of excited energy in my stomach. It was just ahead of me now, but I still couldn't see where, until finally, just before I pulled into the small parking lot, I caught my first glimpse, when as if out of nowhere, big fat summer raindrops came slapping down upon my windscreen. An ominous sign, I thought, as the looming presence of Yorktown Memorial Hospital enveloped me in its shadow. It wasn't quite as big as I had thought it would be, but the foreboding persisted. Trees partially blocked the view into the already darkened windows, a plethora of hiding spots where anyone or anything could be watching my every move. That's when I saw it. A barrier at the foot of the iconic steps with a little sign stating that no one could enter. Small town silliness. I was very disappointed, to be honest, but I had already driven quite a ways, so I called up the owners, Fred and Stephen of Curious Twins Paranormal, and thanks to their quick thinking, I was back on the road and headed over to another of their familiar haunts. Thankfully, one of my favourite things to do, other than talking to myself in an empty room, is driving. Specifically, driving country roads to places I've never been before. And if there's a ghost story at the end, even better. I wasn't quite as familiar with the new location, but I knew the name, and I was eager to check it out. But when the GPS said I was just a few minutes away, I thought I'd made some sort of mistake. This was no small town, but a bustling San Antonio street. There was traffic being held up by an obnoxiously loud train, people arguing in the McDonald's drive-thru, bus stops full of people waiting in the relentless heat to go home after a long day, while others were emerging from nearby motels dressed and ready for whatever the night had to bring. Did I take a wrong turn? I took a sudden left off the main road under an unlit bridge and into what in the dark of the evening felt like utter wilderness surrounded by trees and brush with glimpses of people's faces as they walked through. As the road curved around the bend, the lights atop the hill ahead signalled the warm embrace of Victoria's Black Swan Inn. I genuinely thought I had gone on a wild goose chase, but the house is nestled right between the Salado and Walsham creeks, so there's a myriad of walking trails which the locals make much use of, which explained the random faces peering back at me from the darkened trees as I rode in. I met Fred and Stephen as they were preparing for that evening's tour and investigation.
Hi, good to see you.
Okay.
Good to see you. Yeah, nice to meet you. We're glad you're here. It's so good to see all of you guys.
The temporary closure of the hospital had really thrown a spanner in the works, but they were still graceful enough to sit down for a quick interview before the festivities began. We started with Stephen, and I asked him the first thing that came to mind. Why?
Yeah, my story definitely was childhood. I grew up the youngest of 4 boys. I was the baby of the family, and I was definitely babied. They still, as an adult, call me baby. So I was always scared for whatever reason, and my brothers would like jump out of closets and try and scare me. And I, at one point, was like, you know what? I'm just not going to be scared anymore. I'm just going to stop. I'm going to just like watch all the scary movies, and I'm going to consume as much like macabre content as possible and get over that. And that's how I guess this fascination started. And then, of course, scary stories to tell in the dark. So good. The illustrations, the stories themselves. I think I even memorized like one of the poems that was in there. It was just like so cool to me. And so I just fell in love with like scary stories, gothic horror, scary movies, horror movies. And I was just challenging myself to see what the most extreme kind of stuff as I could. And of course, like watching old episodes of Unsolved Mysteries and stuff like that. And I never personally experienced anything paranormal until I met Fred. And, Fred considers himself a psychic medium. And I had experienced things that I just never thought that I would personally experience, and it just kind of affirmed like, oh, this is something that people, have going on in their lives. People, and from all walks of life experience the paranormal, the unexplained. And that's a really cool thing. And I think that it, can bring people together. And Fred also, kind of introduced me into kind of a fascination of history and the darker parts of our history. And whenever we would travel together, we would do ghost tours and visit cemeteries, things like that. And we just had fun together doing those things. And then we also did tours here in San Antonio, and we recognized that, like, hey, there's some missing pieces here. We're not talking about the indigenous traumas that were faced for thousands of years. We're not talking about the history of displacement and the history of suppressing voices. And so, there's something to that is important and often lends itself to haunts, to paranormal activity. And so we decided after some time to start our own company and do things a little bit differently and explore those darker parts of our history. Because I think, a lot of times as Texans, it can be very easy to go into like, oh, we're proud. There's so much to be proud of as Texans. We became independent from Mexico. We had the Battle of the Alamo, but what else? What else? And if we explore those darker parts of history, and we say this all the time, that's how we, make a better future. That's the why. That's how we got here. This is our full-time job. This is our livelihood. This is, everything to us. And I think that, and the care for the storytelling and the history is why we love doing what we do. And meeting people too. I mean, just like whenever we meet somebody new who like hears about what we do or they know what we do, it's like, oh, I experienced this when I was 10 years old. Everybody has their own kind of story, and they feel comfortable enough to share that with us because of the field that we're in. I think at the heart, we're just big nerds. We love to learn things. We're lifelong learners, and we're just constantly digging into history and like very niche subjects and very niche parts of history too.
We can probably all relate to Stephen's introduction to the macabre world of horror movies and paranormal nerddom. And also, like most of us ghost geeks, that love for spooky stories overlaps with the very real dark histories which birthed the legends. Fred's story, however, was a little less scary stories to tell in the dark and a little more, well, let's just get into it.
When I was very young, probably about 3.5, I started having dreams and experiences, and I made a prediction like when I was about 3.5, and that was that my great-grandmother was going to die like December the 28th, and I knew that she was going to die then. I told my whole family. I'm like 3.5 years old, and they are like just thinking that's weird, and then it happened like exactly the way I told my family. And then I had interactions with my great-grandmother after her death, and there was just kind of like a series of experiences, some of them really positive and some of them really scary as a kid. Like I think you don't know what you're kind of getting into as a kid and don't know what to understand and how to understand things. So one of the things that have always helped me is trying to read and books. And so I think I've learned a lot through that as a kid. Learned a lot about kind of the gifts that I was experiencing. But ever since I was a kid, I experienced some of these things.
I don't want to brush over the fact that as a 3-year-old, Fred predicted the death of his great-grandmother. But I suppose if we were trying to be skeptical about something here, we could say that maybe it was just a lucky guess. A really morbid 3-year-old's lucky guess that came to fruition. Exactly how he described it would happen. It's a pretty popular theory that if ghosts are real, children are more likely to see them than we are. Maybe theory isn't exactly the right word here because it's certainly not a scientific fact, but it's something that is spoken of across many cultures, and the general thought is that children are just closer to the veil. Maybe they are, Or maybe they're just more open to accepting what they see or feel rather than doubting themselves and making excuses like us adults. Even if kids say creepy things occasionally, it's still a somewhat heartwarming idea that it's just our deceased loved ones checking over us. For a lot of people, even the non-believers, this is a source of comfort, especially when it doesn't seem to go any further. For Fred though, it wasn't just his abuela or Mima popping in for a quick hello.
One of the experiences that I had, it was kind of made scary, like on accidentally because of my mom in a way. And my mom would always like tuck me in, read me a story, and then, tell me you better be good or the boogeyman will come and get you. And so, I had this experience that my mom had just, given me a kiss, told me the boogeyman will come and get you, don't be good. And she left the room. Probably about 5 minutes later, I realized there's like a light in the room, and I kind of like look up over the covers, and there is a man, and he is sitting. I had like this, I don't know if you remember, like those popcorn tins like that you get at Christmas and they're filled with it, like you use them as a trash can. Well, I had one there in my room, and he was sitting on this popcorn tin, and he like was just green. He was like this green figure. He looked like he had moss on him. He just had these yellowish eyes, and they looked like afraid. They looked like they looked really intense, and I just remember him like looking at me, and I was so scared because I think I thought like, okay, this is a boogeyman. This is what my mom told me about, and so like my mission was I'm just to be quiet, because that was part of being Have as a kid. Is like at night you were quiet. So I just remember being quiet, and I remember at one point falling asleep, and I woke up again. And he was still there, and I remember again I nodded off, and I finally fell asleep, and the sun came up, and he was no longer there. But that has haunted me ever since. I never really understood who this green man was, but one of the things that identified with him was his eyes. Like, it seemed to me that he was scared, that he was even trying to speak, but he couldn't. And I think that maybe he was just there because he knew I could see him. But to me, that was super scary as a kid. This green man glowing in my room, sitting on this popcorn tin with the idea that this could be the boogeyman. And I think that that really solidified, to me, what could be out there, and what is out there, and wanting to understand that.
This is a scary story. A terrifying experience that seems right out of an old Stephen King movie. As Fred was describing this, I was instantly transported back to my own childhood bedroom, feeling the terror of peeking over the blanket to see this horrific vision of someone who had clearly met an untimely end. Skeptic hats are well and truly out the window here. We are getting into this one. The unfathomable fear that Fred must have felt in this moment is beyond me, but there's another reason why this green man has stuck with me. I don't think I'd ever heard of someone seeing this type of almost stereotypically ghoulish apparition before, until about a week before this interview took place. And since then, I've heard similar descriptions from multiple people. It just keeps coming up. Now, I'm not a medium, but it seems like maybe how he appeared to Fred is how this entity's body looked at that moment, or symbolized that maybe his body had never been found. This is complete speculation, of course, but maybe the fact that he couldn't talk told us about how he had died, and maybe Fred, as a young, open individual with psychic abilities, was a beacon in the darkness for this poor man. Yes, this is a scary story. A horrific vision, but when we sit with it for a minute, or years, as in Fred's case, there's something else here. Something tragic. I think it's unfair for us to think that this child could have held any answer, but maybe this person was scared and just needed someone to sit with.
I really don't know. I don't know much about, I never really tried to read him. I was just terrified by this. I think that he was a person that for whatever reason, he couldn't speak. And that was in my head, this, whatever reason, he can't actually speak. And I think that maybe he knew I could see him. And that was the only thing that was that barrier, communication. And I think that I honestly now think he never meant to scare me. I just was a kid that didn't understand that. And in a way, like sometimes I still imagine this green man, and I don't look at it as being scary today, but I almost kind of feel a compassion towards him. And maybe that's what he needed. Maybe he just needed, a kid that was young and compassionate and wasn't just going to run away. I just sat there with him, and I didn't run away. And I think maybe other kids, they would have just ran away. I think I think I was just so afraid to like disappoint my parents and to like make noise or to cry or do something that I just try to do like compress the thoughts, make it work, and not get in trouble. I think that was the goal as a kid too, is like, I don't want to get in trouble.
What's scarier to a child? The ghost of a rotting man in your room, or the wrath of your mother after disturbing the solitude of her evening? Obviously, Fred was being quite light-hearted when he was telling this, but I do think it's worth mentioning because for kids there can often be certain rules that must not be broken regardless of how crazy things are getting. Oftentimes when I'm doing these interviews, I find myself getting so engrossed in the stories that I have to take a minute to sit back and just observe my surroundings. I was sitting in the living room of a house that's well over 100 years old, in a town that I'm not familiar with. How many other people had sat in this living room throughout the years? How much business was conducted, lives were lived? And here I am, just looking for a ghost story. I won't go into a full deep dive of the rich history of the house here because, to be perfectly honest, there's too much to cover and I wouldn't be able to do it justice. But I can say that Fred and Stephen do a great job on their tours of the property. It's said the house is built on a Native American burial site, and there have been multiple accounts of Native American spirits all throughout the property and down by the Salado Creek itself. The property is also the site of the Battle of Salado. This awful battle took place on September 18th, 1842 and saw 80 dead Mexican soldiers, while only a single Texan perished. Worse still is that it's reported that most of the soldiers who died were left to lay where they fell. No burial, no cremation. In 1867, the Ripstein family took the land as settlers and started building on the property. Most notably, they built the milking barn, which still stands to this day and is notorious for its paranormal activity. The house has stood atop the hill for over 100 years, but it's gone through several major renovations to transform it into the domineering mansion that we know today. It's been home to several different families with all the usual miseries and tragedies that families experience, and some rather unusual. The one that stands out the most is the apparent suicide of a man by the name of Hall Park Street Jr. Yes, that was his name. Hall Park Street Jr. One August day in 1965, Park was found after supposedly hanging himself with a necktie, while his hands were tied behind his back. Some speculate that Park Street Jr. was murdered by someone who believed he was hiding treasure somewhere in the south wing of the house. This took place a few years after the death of his wife, who, in official records, was said to have passed due to breast cancer, but there are some who also say that this may have been some sort of cover-up. Conspiracies abound. Even the current owners have had their fair share of tragedy on the property. Joanne Rivera's mother passed away while living in the house, and not long after, some thieves broke into the house and stole a lot of her mother's possessions. Joanne, clearly upset, took to spirit communication for help, and allegedly the information that she received was brought to the police, and eventually pretty much everything was returned. I spent a good few hours hanging around the house that evening and visiting the various outbuildings, and I didn't necessarily feel anything except for behind the milking barn, but we'll get into that later. I typically never feel anything anywhere I go, to be honest. Like I said, I'm not a psychic medium. But while going through my footage, I did come across some interesting noises that could potentially be EVPs. I don't know that I'll be sharing any of these on here because, like I said in season 1, I don't want this to turn into a say what you see kind of situation. But Stephen and Fred have spent a lot of time at that property over the years, and they have had plenty of bizarre experiences.
As far as the tours and investigations that we host, this location I've had the most intense experiences here at the Black Swan Inn. In one instance, we were out in the milking barn, which we take folks to typically at the end of the tour. And it was me and just a couple, husband and wife, I think. And we were in 3 different parts of the building. And the building itself is dissected by a hallway. And there's a big room and there's 2 small rooms on the other side. I was in the big room and each of them were in the 2 smaller rooms. And we all had our EMF detectors out. We were just walking around, seeing if we could sense something. And it had been like 10, 15 minutes had passed by and it was just kind of quiet. And as I was getting ready to go into the hallway and tell them like, hey, let's move on to another place, I started feeling like chills, like top of my head to the bottom of my feet. My EMF detector starts going off. And I didn't realize this, but at the same time, each of the other 2 people were experiencing the exact same thing. Full body chills, EMF detectors going off full blast in 3 different spots. And at this moment, a box flies off the shelf and lands directly in front of my feet. And it was like firmly planted on a shelf. You know, it wasn't like half on, half off. We all kind of are in each other's like eyesight. We see this happen and we run out of the milking bar and decide not to go back in for the rest of the night. A lot of times when we're here alone, we're in different parts of the property, or we'll have a private tour and we're kind of separated. And there's been a lot of times where I've just felt like I'm not by myself. You know, I'm like, there's something here with me. In one instance, I was, just walking back to the house. And I think I was by myself at that time. I think it was just a private tour. It was just me. And they had left for the day. I was locking up. I was going to the car. And I feel like, okay, there's something's here. Just like tingles in the back of my head. And I hear very loudly, hey, from right behind me. And I think, okay, well, it has to be a living person. That there's people who live here on this property. And I thought, okay, well, maybe it's, the owner's son, maybe it's somebody. I turn around, I don't see anybody. And so I grab my bag and walk a little faster to get to the car. So those are probably the most intense kind of experience. I mean, we've also had like doors open and close. At this point, we've been doing this 8 years now, since 2017. It isn't, it's startling. It's more startling than anything. But it's never like, I don't know, it's never like scary. I don't feel afraid. I just feel like, whoa, like, when it's like a loud noise, you just feel like, okay, that's scary. I'm going to move a little faster now.
Well, this is a unique property, and it's a unique property because we sit at a place that we have 2 different creeks that meet. We also sit on a old, like, Native American burial mound. We are on top of that. We are also on top of the Edwards Aquifer. And so one of the things that we get is we get a lot of that water energy, and that can come with a lot of our guest relatives. And that's the really cool thing about what we do here, is that this place, I think because of the water elements, because of where we are, I've had so many of our guests that they want to see a mom or dad who's passed away, or even one of their kids that have passed away, and they've had those experiences here. That's always been fascinating, that yeah, there are spirits that reside here. This is their home. But this is also a place where spirits can get in touch with their loved ones, and I've seen that play out over time. And as far as something that has really kind of frightened me or taken me by surprise, yeah, I've experienced that here for sure. There's a room here that has a psychomantium in it, which is a device to help us connect to the spirit world. It's like a closet that you can sit in.
I was familiar with the term psychomantium from years of consuming various paranormal TV shows, podcasts and books, but I'd never really thought much about it. I thought it was probably just some spooky Victorian era method to trick the mind, or something that charlatanic psychic mediums would use to prey on grieving individuals back in the day. But when Fred mentioned that they had roots going back to ancient Greece, I was intrigued. Dr. Raymond Moody seems to be the leading authority on modern psychomantium writings. He's mostly known today for coining the phrase near-death experience, or NDE, in his book Life After Death in 1975. That's a subject for a different day though. It seems psychomantiums must have been a fairly common tool for the ancient Greeks though, as they even get a mention in Homer's Odyssey, with Odysseus gazing into a pool of sacrificial sheep's blood in order to communicate with his deceased mother. In the 1950s, archaeologists uncovered a polished bronze cauldron at Ephora in the region of Epirus in Greece. This cauldron would have been filled with some sort of liquid like oil or blood and used as a mirror to gaze into. What's even more interesting, to me at least, as I went down this rabbit hole, is that the site where this cauldron was unearthed was just half a kilometre away from Necromantium, which was where the ancient Greeks said the gates of the underworld stood. Pilgrims would bring offerings to this place where the living and unliving worlds met and spent days in isolation, wandering through dark corridors, performing rituals and prayers in the hopes that they might see their deceased loved ones again. After reading up on what literature was available to him at the time, Dr. Moody arranged a large mirror in a darkened room with a chair angled specifically so as not to be able to see one's reflection, and spent several hours setting his intention on his late maternal grandmother, meditating on old memories and looking at photographs of her, etc. And then he spent an hour gazing into the darkened mirror, but to no avail. Shortly after this experiment, however, he claims to have seen his father's mother appearing much younger and healthier than she had been at the time of her death. He claims to have both heard her voice, which had a quote, crisp electrical quality to it, and also felt that she could communicate telepathically with him. He described his relationship with his paternal grandmother as not great, hence why he was trying to communicate with his other grandmother initially, but that the encounter that he did have was a very healing one. He went on to study the results of about 300 individuals who took part in his psychomantium experiment, and overall he found the results to be transformative and potentially therapeutic. Not at all dangerous or frightening. The article published by the Society for Psychical Research, where I got most of this information from, goes on to state his other findings as follows. About a quarter of the subjects encountered a deceased person other than the one that they planned to contact. In about 10% of the cases, the apparition seemed to come out of the mirror, sometimes seeming to touch the subject. A few subjects felt that they entered the mirror into another world. About half the subjects held conversations with the apparitions mentally or audibly. In 25% of the cases, the apparition was encountered not during the psychomantium session itself, but afterwards, usually within 24 hours. Almost all subjects asserted that they experienced the reunions as real events, not fantasies or dreams, certain that they were in the presence of deceased loved ones. As with near-death experiences, the subjects were powerfully affected by their experiences, which challenged their view of reality and life's meaning. To go back to what Fred was saying about the amount of natural water surrounding the house and the fact that many people, including himself, have reportedly encountered their own deceased family members there, I'm wondering if an active psychomantium in the house plus these other factors have turned it into a modern day necromantium. As I'm writing this, I'm thinking about the one very strange EVP my camera picked up. I definitely didn't hear anything while I was there, and I wasn't actually doing any EVP sessions or anything. I was just walking around trying to catch some B-roll clips, make sure that I had seen the whole property before I took off, and this is just something that I picked up in camera. But to me at least, it quite clearly said, let me just play it here first. I heard the word memory. If you heard something else, please let me know, but while there was other people on the property that night, I know for a fact I was alone at that moment. I even called Fred and Stephen during the week to make sure that there was nothing in that building or at that particular part of the property that could have made that noise, and they assured me that it's only got lights. That's basically it. There's no air conditioning or anything as far as I'm aware. Now, if meditating on the memory of a loved one really helps the psychomantium work, then maybe this was more than just an EVP. Maybe this was an instruction. Or maybe I'm just clutching at straws. When I mentioned that people would bring offerings to the necromantium, they do the same at Victoria's Black Swan Inn, only with items they believe to be haunted.
This room, it also has a doll that's in it that is known to be haunted. Her name is Abigail. She was actually on a TV show called It Feels Evil, and during that show, they put her in a case and they decided to bury her underground, do a binding ritual on her, and then after so many weeks being underground, they dug her up, put her in a glass case, and had a couple of rituals they did along with that, sealed that case up, and she's been in there ever since. But when they did this, they told us that they believed that whatever was attached to it was a male. Years of giving tours and doing investigations, never experienced anything like that. I had experienced some EVPs, some really haunting EVPs with the doll, mostly around like inviting people to take pictures of the doll. Very kind of creepy, interesting stuff. But I had a day that we were locking up, and it was like 4 a.m. We had done one of these investigational tours, and we were ready for bed, you know. And I go up to lock up that room that has a psychomantium, and standing in front of that doll case was a man. And he was a man that was like the same almost height as that. And he was just literally standing very straight in front of it. And I like kind of jumped back. And as I jumped back, there was nobody there at all. And one of the things that automatically happened to me, and I really can't explain this, happened to me many times, but whenever I experience something that's like just genuine and I don't know how to like interpret it, I guess mentally, my eyes will just like water. Like if they're crying, but I'm not emotional. And that's exactly what I experienced. Like, you know, my face is wet from these tears, but I'm not like emotional at all. I'm just kind of like shocked. That was kind of a scary thing, I think, because when you're closing up, you never really expect to see like a human standing, and it looked not like a ghost, it looked like a human. And I think that's always kind of like a trick on the eye when you see something 1 second and then it's not there again in another. It is alarming, and that's probably one of the most alarming things I've experienced here. My thought was that the doll had an attachment. That attachment was always a male attachment. It was a female doll, and many people interpreted it to be a female. In fact, almost every single EVP that we got came out to be what sounded like a female voice. But many people had picked up that it was a male. And so I think that sometimes it kind of goes to show you is that maybe attachments don't always seem, you know, what they look like on the shell or the surface. Sometimes that energy is different, and sometimes it can be really surprising. I cannot tell you if that is an evil thing. I don't necessarily believe it is. But there have been many people who believe just the idea that it presents as female in EVPs, and in physical form it looks male, that perhaps there's something more there. And it could be, I think, when we're dealing with spirits and we're dealing with stuff, I think that we also might have a spirit that like could have like lived their life with a minimal IQ, could have had some kind of developmental disability, and perhaps this idea of mimicking a doll's voice is very normal and natural to them, and it's not scary. But it could be, you know, considered by a conservative Christian to be a really scary thing. And I think it really is how you look at it.
Fred actually took the words right out of my mouth when he started talking about the possibility that maybe the attachment was someone who in life had had some sort of mental disability and is just playing the part of Abigail in the EVPs just as a child would when playing with their dolls. That's if we decide to believe in this type of thing at all, of course. Skeptical argument. I watched the TV show that Fred referenced, and I'm pretty sure it was on a free streaming site, so if you wanted to watch it for yourselves, go ahead. I also reached out to the folks who had performed this binding ritual for the TV show. In fact, we're friends on Instagram now, but they left me on red. No hard feelings. Maybe we can get them on in a future episode if enough people get together. What I particularly like about Fred and Stephen though is how they are actively democratizing paranormal investigations. They're creating an accessible path for people who have maybe had an interest in the subject for years but didn't know where to begin, or didn't know anyone else who shared their interest. It can be a little bit daunting trying to figure out where to start, but Fred and Stephen literally provide the locations and the tools that you need to get started. And they also share the opinion that the most important tool is you.
While I say that I never had experienced anything paranormal prior to Fred, I think that the truth is I probably did, but I rationalized it. I ignored it. I was too afraid to dig into it. And we think everybody has the ability to tap into the other side in different ways, in different levels. Some people are born more in tune with that gift. Fred's always telling me all the time we're somewhere, he's like, did you see that? Did you hear that? And I'm like, no, I didn't. I didn't. But I feel like doing what we do, I'm definitely more open to, like, I guess I pay more attention to feelings. And we always, we say the most important tool that you have whenever you're doing investigation is your body, like getting in tune with your body, listening to your senses. Like when your hair sticks up on your arms or the back of your neck, like that's an indicator. Your body's telling you something. There's energy around. So I would say that I haven't become more skilled. I've become more aware and more in tune.
I've seen a lot of my family after they're gone, and some of the people I've seen, I have no idea who they are. I've seen glimpses of things. I've seen things that don't make sense to me. And sometimes I see things that actually make a lot of sense. Now as an adult, I do try to be a little bit of protectiveness of this, and I really try to ground myself. I have met a lot of other people who are very sensitive, and they're not real grounded sometimes, and they're almost like kind of like manic energy sometimes. And so I recognize that in myself from my younger days, and I've really done my best to, just be a little more chill. And I think that's kind of like my approach with it is now I pretty much channel. So if I'm going to talk to a spirit, I kind of go into a room in my mind. And that is a warm room. There's always a fireplace. It's always like inviting. There's books around. It's like, it'd be someplace that I would enjoy being in. And I invite whoever, a client or whoever it is that we want to channel in, I invite them to come and sit down. Usually within a couple of moments, I will experience a smell, a feeling, a thought. Sometimes I'll see the person. Sometimes the person will like have a big conversation and it's just, and they're really happy. I've been even in experiences where spirits have come through and they're very protective, and like their daughter is talking to them or somebody, and their dad, and the daughter is trying to get closure, and there's just like this amazing protectiveness where you've even felt it and they've felt that in the room. So I think while I am generally sort of a skeptic with the paranormal, like I see things, I understand things, but I also understand that we as humans, we interpret fear certain ways, we interpret thoughts certain ways, mental health, there's a lot of things there. So I always really want to try to understand that spirituality in there. Is it a ghost? Is it something spiritual? Is it something deeper? Is it an emotion? But all of these things I think are connected to that spirit world in a way. And I think that when we become and allow ourselves to be sensitive, we can see things that normally we couldn't. And I think that whether some people might think they don't have a gift or some people might think they do, I think every single person can connect to the spirit world in some way, shape, or form. We just have to adventure there if we really want to. But, I know that sometimes we're just our own worst enemies. Like we want something so bad that we simply focusing on the want and not on the present. And perhaps if we really want to understand something that we can't, we just have to focus on the present.
Maybe this is a skill that I will actively try and hone if I continue my journey with Houston Strange, because even though I have had a handful of strange encounters over the years, I don't see myself as particularly spiritual or an open individual when it comes to the paranormal. In fact, I often say that I'm a psychic dud, but maybe it's just that a lot of the time I just don't want to open that door. I did have one interesting encounter while I was wandering the property looking for some interesting shots though. That actually happened right after I had unknowingly captured that strange EVP. The back of the milking barn is surrounded by trees, and as I was looking around, about to approach another smaller outbuilding, I heard footsteps coming from the trees. Like I said, there were other people on the property, so I was expecting to see someone come walking towards me, but as I stopped to look, so did the footsteps. Strange, I thought, but it's probably just an animal or something like that. But then every time I moved, it would move. And every time I stopped, it stopped. I can hear something in the woods. It's quite loud. When I stop moving, it stops moving. I genuinely wasn't thinking about ghosts of Native American spirits or Confederate soldiers at this point. I was thinking, this better not be a feral hog or a rabid raccoon. I then turned around wanting to see if the sounds would continue, and to my very real horror, I saw that a spider that was far too big for comfort had spun his web right in the middle of the path I was about to take to get to the other building. Yeah, nah. We're going back. So with my tail firmly tucked between my legs, I swiftly got out of there and did not turn off my flashlight until I was back at the main house. I think I would have preferred the feral hog, if I'm being honest, compared to that big spider. I don't know how well this will translate here, but I wanted to include it anyway because while going back through the footage, there were more bizarre sounds, and while I'm not saying it was paranormal, the whole situation just seemed a little strange in hindsight. It's also an interesting little connection to an upcoming episode which also takes place in Salado Creek. I feel like I may have done a little too much talking in this episode, so please feel free to share your opinions in the comments. But if you want to check out Victoria's Black Swan Inn for yourself, or indeed Yorktown Memorial Hospital, which is back up and running thankfully, check out CuriousTwins.com and get in touch with Fred and Stephen. I'll also link their Instagram below. They are such lovely guys. If you would like to help this show continue, you can become a producer for just $10. This is a one-time fee, not a subscription, and it will go directly to keeping Houston Strange on the road and on the air. So click the link in my bio for further information. This week's producers were Sarah F., Amy P., and Bernard P. Executive producers were Tori Brown, Carl Gill, and Marcus D. So thank you all very much. It is so appreciated. Houston Strange is a completely selfish experiment by me, Adam. I do all the editing, writing, composing, etc. But you tell the story. So don't forget to send me your stories and suggestions for future episodes. Please rate, review, subscribe, and all that good stuff. But most importantly, stay strange, Houston.